Good day, everyone. Today we are going to open a new lesson for our sixth week, and this time we will focus on the differentiation of these key concepts of teaching, which are the approaches, methods, techniques, and strategies. You know what? In the teaching learning process, we need to understand that some concepts that are very common, however, there might be times that teachers will be confused if these concepts wouldn't have a clear definition of them. So in our lesson, I'm going to present to you the definition and establish also the differences among these concepts. So here we go. Now let us start with the first key concept, the approach. A teaching approach is a set of principles, beliefs, or ideas about the nature of learning, which is translated into the classroom. So a teaching approach of a certain teacher is determined by his or her teaching philosophy. So in here, a teaching approach could focus on the following categories. Could be through engagement, focus, or the number. So if you believe that in teaching, it has to be the teacher that needs to be in the center of the teaching and learning process, and that the teacher will have to convey all the information, and that the student will be the one to absorb those information given by the teacher. So you are an advocate of a teacher-centered approach. However, if you believe that students have the capacity to make their own knowledge, and you do not believe that it's just the teachers who are the fountain of knowledge, then you are an advocate. You prefer on a student-centered approach. So when you teach, you give more emphasis on the students, more talk, more engagement on the students rather than with the teacher. So if we have also here the focus, so if you focus on the subject matter, so no matter who your students are, as long as your focus is the content of the lesson and the topic itself, your approach is more on the subject matter. However, if you give emphasis on the type of students that you have, so when you will teach, you will modify your lesson into such that it would fit the interest of your students. So you advocate on the student-centered approach. In terms of number, if you are a teacher who wants to teach your students individually, so you focus more on the individually centered teaching approach or group, you prefer to teach students by group, then you're an advocate of a group-centered approach. So those are the concepts of what an approach is. Now, number two is method. A teaching method is a systematic way of doing something. It implies an orderly, logical arrangement of steps, and it is more procedural. So as you can listen, if you did listen a while ago, you can observe approach, for example, student-teacher or teacher-centered. Student-centered or teacher-centered. So if your approach in doing your lesson is teacher-centered, most likely you would advocate on using the lecture method of teaching. So here in the method, it becomes more systematic because there are steps on how you do a lecture method. Okay, so it becomes narrower as you go to the methods. From approach, it narrows through the method. So that's the difference for on the two. Now we move on to the number three, which is techniques. Teaching techniques are steps we follow when we teach. This is what we call as the teacher's style to accomplish the objective. So in other words, it is techniques is just the flavor you give or you put into the method that you are using. So as we a while ago, I used lecture method. So in doing lecture method, of course there are steps. However, there are different types of teachers. So a lot of teachers use lecture method, but it does not necessarily mean that all those teachers would have the same way in delivering the lecture. There might be some teachers that when they do lecture, they would automatically go on point, give the lecture right away. However, there might also be teachers who still do lecture, however, they employ an interactive way of doing the lecture. So that's the flavor that they give to the lecture method. So that's the technique. Next, we have here the strategies. So you might want to differentiate strategy and technique. For strategies, these are methods of approaching a problem or task, modes of operation for achieving a particular end. Strategies are more flexible depending on the situation compared to the technique. So originally, teaching strategies originated or are borrowed from the term used by the military or the military strategy. You can observe that when the military goes on a mission, they always have a strategy. It's a plan. So what would happen when they will go to the field? What are their strategies? What are the plans that they have to do if this situation could happen or another situation could happen? So meaning in using also that principle in teaching, strategy is flexible. So say for example, still using the lecture method, um, you use an interactive way. However, when you did implement your lecture in an interactive way, you see your students who are sleepy. You observe them to be sleepy. So that's the reason why instead of um, going to your original plan, you twist it a little bit to patch up, to make to see to it that there is an adjustment on the situation at hand. So you ask questions to them, and in answering, you want them to use their body as a response to your question. So that's strategy. So those are the differences of the four key concepts in teaching: the approach, the method, the technique, and the strategy. So if you look into it, we can compare these different concepts just like in a spiral, wherein the outermost will be the approach and the innermost will be the strategy. Now let us summarize the examples that I have mentioned to you a while ago by making it more concrete. So here, say for example, there is a lesson about the focus is differentiation between the past tense and the present tense of the verb. So since you're a teacher who believes that the teacher should be the one who dispense the knowledge to your students, so use a teacher-centered approach to this because you think that students would learn more if you are the one who teaches the concept to them and they will process it. So you utilize a teacher-centered approach. Since you use the teacher-centered approach, of course, it, you would want also the best way that you think it would be most effective is through a lecture method. And then in implementing the lecture method, you want it to be an interactive lecture. So that's the reason why, as a strategy, when you did your lecture, you want your students to do a think, pair, share on talking about the differentiation on the present and past tense of the verb. So as you can see here, whatever your strategy that you would employ, it has to be consistent with the different technique, the method, and the approach that you use. So everything here from 1 up to 4, from approach, method, technique, and strategy, these 4 has to be aligned. Okay, there has to be an alignment between these 4. So thank you, and that's it for our lesson for this week on the differentiation of the 4 key concepts. Let us just be reminded that there is no single best approach, method, technique, or strategy that applies to all. So it depends upon the type of learners that you have, it depends upon the nature of the subject, and it depends also on your beliefs, on your philosophy as a teacher. All right, so just have to bear in mind that whatever the goal, whatever the objective of your lesson is, what you need to ensure that these will be accomplished, whatever means that you will use. So it's just like you have one destination, but there could be different routes that you can go as long as you will reach into that destination.